The rain had not stopped for 3 days in Seattle, and Eliza Grant felt as if the sky itself was mourning with her. She stood by her bedroom window, watching the drops streak down the glass, each one echoing the thoughts she tried to silence. At just 20 years old, she had learned how to carry burdens most people twice her age would never know. Her sister's laughter, so fragile now under the weight of illness, was the only thing that kept her standing. Chloe needed treatment her family could never afford. Their mother worked double shifts, their father was long gone, and Eliza had quietly become the pillar holding their world together. Eliza was shy, careful with her words, cautious with her heart. She had grown up under her mother's strict watch, learning to protect her reputation, her dignity, her innocence. That innocence was still intact, untouched, untested. A 20-year-old virgin, more familiar with textbooks and medical charts than with the trembling warmth of love. And now, that innocence was about to be bartered away in a way she had never imagined. The man who had offered salvation was John Chambers, 32 years old, a name whispered in business circles with awe and envy. A self-made millionaire, the kind of man people called untouchable, not just for his wealth but for the icy walls he had built around himself. The stories about him were countless, brilliant, ruthless, unreachable. But what the world did not know, what only a handful of people had ever glimpsed, was the truth he carried like a scar beneath his perfectly tailored suits. John Chambers had never led a woman close. Not one. He had never kissed lips in passion, never held another body in intimacy, never trusted touch. His heart had been carved hollow by abandonment long ago, and he had decided it was safer to live untouched than to risk breaking again. When Eliza first sat across from him in his glass-walled office, the silence between them had been deafening. She remembered staring at the polished desk, at her own reflection in its surface, while he studied her with gray eyes that seemed to see too much. His proposal had not been wrapped in flowers or romance. It was a transaction laid bare. "I can fund your sister's treatment," he had said, his voice steady, almost mechanical. "In return, I ask for something I have never had, a wife, a marriage." The words had hung in the air like smoke. She had expected arrogance, maybe pity, but instead there was something raw in his tone, vulnerability disguised as formality. She had asked him why her, why now? His answer was simple, almost heartbreaking. "Because you looked at me," he had whispered, "and didn't see the money first." And so the vow was made, papers signed, dates set. A young woman who had never known love and a man who had never allowed it, bound together under circumstances that neither could fully comprehend. On the night before the wedding, Eliza lay awake, her heart pounding in rhythm with the storm outside. She told herself she was doing this for Chloe, for her family, for survival. Yet somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice wondered if there could be something more hidden in this arrangement. She had seen the flicker of pain in John's eyes, the way he hesitated before extending his hand, as if afraid she might burn him just by touching his skin. Across the city, in a penthouse high above the rain-slicked streets, John Chambers stood before his window, staring into the darkness. He had built empires from nothing, conquered industries, outwitted men twice his age, yet tomorrow he would face the one thing that terrified him most: human closeness. He was untouched, untested, and the thought of binding his life to Eliza, this shy, resilient girl who carried her family's words, pulled on her shoulders, both unsettled him and pulled at him in a way he could not explain. Was this marriage just a contract written in desperation, or was it the beginning of something neither of them had ever dared to hope for? The storm whispered no answers, only questions that clung to the air as dawn approached. By morning, Eliza Grant and John Chambers would stand side by side, exchanging vows not of love but of necessity. Yet in the hidden chambers of their hearts, both wondered the same terrifying, thrilling thing. What if necessity was only the beginning? A heavy sky where clouds pressed low over the city as if the heavens themselves were witnesses to secrets too fragile for daylight. The wedding had been planned in haste, arranged more by circumstance than romance. Yet the moment Eliza stepped into the quiet chapel, she felt the air shift. It smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, and every eye turned to her with curiosity and speculation. She was only 20. Her steps careful, her gown simple, but her presence filled the space like a whispered promise. John stood at the altar, his posture stiff, his gray eyes unreadable. He wore his wealth-like armor, the tailored suit, the flawless tie, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled at his sides, and when he saw Eliza walking down the aisle alone, something flickered in his gaze, something that looked like both hunger and fear. The silence of the room was deafening. No grand orchestra, no lavish display, only the sound of her heels tapping against stone. Each step felt like a question. Would this union be a lifeline or a prison for them both? Eliza lifted her chin, steadying herself with the thought of her sister Chloe, who waited at home with hope burning in her fragile frame. This marriage was more than vows. It was survival. When she reached him, John extended his hand. The world seemed to pause. Her fingers slipped into his, and the contact was like lightning, raw, sharp, unexpected. He did not flinch, but his grip tightened as if letting go would undo everything. His voice was low, almost broken, when he repeated the words of the vow, and for the first time the world saw cracks in the mask of the untouchable millionaire. The kiss at the altar was no more than a ghost, a brush of lips so light it might have been imagined. But in that single second, Eliza felt his entire body tense, as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, suspended between terror and release. The press whispered at the back pews, snapping furtive photos. The rumor already alive in their whispers. The reclusive John Chambers, untouched by women, now bound to a virgin nurse. Afterward, when the chapel emptied and the last signature was written, Eliza found herself in the back of a sleek black car beside the man she had just married. The silence between them was heavier than any storm. Her pulse raced and his breathing was uneven, though he tried to hide it. Their reflections blurred in the rain-streaked window. Two strangers tied by vows neither fully understood. "You are my wife now," he said finally, his tone deliberate, but beneath it lay a tremor. "I do not know how to be a husband. I have never allowed anyone this close." His confession cut through the tension like a blade. Eliza turned toward him, her voice soft but steady. "Then let us learn together." For a fleeting instant his mask cracked completely, and she saw the boy behind the millionaire, the boy who had once been abandoned, the boy who had built walls so high he forgot what warmth felt like as the car carried them toward the cold expanse of his penthouse. Both of them sat in silence, wondering. The same thing. Was this the end of innocence or the beginning of something dangerous and extraordinary? And as the city lights flickered against the windows, the suspense only deepened, for the night was coming, and with it the uncharted territory of first touch, first trust, and the possibility of a love either had ever dared to dream. A silence so deep it seemed to press against the walls of the penthouse. Eliza stepped into John's world for the first time, and it felt less like a home and more like a monument. The marble floors gleamed, the glass windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the city drowning in nightlights. But there was no warmth, no photographs, no trace of life, just emptiness cloaked in luxury. Her suitcase looked almost fragile against the vastness of the living room, a simple bag filled with modest clothes and the scent of lavender soap. It seemed almost out of place in a space that smelled faintly of leather and steel. John walked ahead, his shoulders rigid, his footsteps echoing like thunder across the polished floor. He gestured toward the hallway, his voice even but strained. "This is your room, if you prefer privacy." She looked at him, searching for something in his expression, and found only walls. She hesitated before answering softly. "We are married now, are we not?" His hand tightened on the doorframe as though the question had pierced through him. His eyes flickered with something vulnerable, something raw. "I have never shared space with anyone. I do not know how to do this." The words lingered heavy in the air. Eliza crossed the distance between them, her heart pounding. She did not reach for him, not yet, but she stood close enough that he could feel the steady rhythm of her presence. "I have never done this either," she admitted, her cheeks burning, "but maybe we can start with small things." John's gaze lowered to the floor, his lips parting with a soundless breath. The weight of the past clung to him like chains. Abandonment, betrayal, the belief that touch could only wound, yet in that moment, with her standing so near, He felt something shift like a lock clicking open. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The clatter of silverware on porcelain seemed to scream in the emptiness. Eliza finally broke the silence, asking him about his favorite meal, his favorite color, his favorite memory. But each question was met with hesitation, and then silence, until finally he whispered, "I do not remember favorites. I only remember survival." The admission struck her like a blade. Her chest ached as she watched him retreat inside himself again. But instead of pulling away, she placed her fork down and leaned forward. "Then maybe I will help you remember." Later that night, when the city had quieted and only the hum of electricity filled the penthouse, Eliza walked to the balcony where John stood. The skyline glittered beneath them like 1,000 secrets. He turned slightly as she approached, his jaw tense, his eyes shadowed by thoughts he could not speak. "Why did you marry me?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with fear but with the courage to know the truth. He held her gaze for a long moment, his breath uneven. "Because you saw me," he said finally. "Not the money, not the mask, just me. And I could not let that slip away." The confession sent a shiver racing down her spine, and for the first time since the vows, Eliza felt her heart stir with something unfamiliar, something dangerous and powerful. As the night closed in around them, the suspense thickened, for beneath the marble and the glass lay a man learning to breathe again, and a woman realizing that this arrangement might not just save her sister, it might consume her heart in ways she never expected. A storm rolling across the Seattle sky, thunder echoing through the city like a warning. Eliza sat at the long dining table, her untouched plate before her as lightning lit up the glass walls of the penthouse. John sat at the other end, his posture rigid, his gray eyes fixed on the rain. His silence weighed heavier than the storm. Finally she spoke, breaking the fragile stillness. "You never told me why you cannot bear to be touched." He turned his head slowly, his jaw tightening, his hand tightening around the glass he held until she thought it might shatter in his grip. For a moment he said nothing. Then his voice came low and rough, like a confession dragged from the depths. "My mother died when I was a boy. My father walked out 2 weeks later. He never came back. No one held me, not once, not through grief, not through years of emptiness. I learned that touch was a lie, that people who promised to stay always left." The rawness of his words cut into her, and for the first time she saw the cracks in his armor. Not the millionaire, not the untouchable figure, but the broken man who had built walls so high, even he could not see over them. Eliza rose slowly and walked to him, each step echoing louder than thunder. She reached out and he flinched almost instinctively. She froze, her hand inches from his shoulder, her heart racing. "I will never leave," she whispered. "Not as long as you let me stay." His eyes flickered with something wild, torn between fear and longing, trembling. He let her hand rest against him just for a moment. The contact was brief, almost fragile, but it sent a shock through them both. His breath hitched, his glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, but neither moved, their attention locked only on that single fragile point of connection. The spell broke with the sound of her phone buzzing across the table. Eliza stepped back quickly, glancing at the screen. Her mother had texted with Nay. Chloe's condition was worsening. The treatments were failing. Eliza's chest tightened. The storm outside felt like it was inside her too. She lifted her gaze to John, and for the first time there was no hesitation in her words. "I need help." He rose slowly, his face pale but his eyes burning with something fierce. "Then let me help," he said. "Let me take care of her. Let me take care of you." But she shook her head. "I don't want to be your charity case. I don't want my sister to be a debt." He stepped closer, his voice sharp with desperation. "It isn't charity. It's the only way I know how to keep you near." Their eyes clashed, lightning blazing through the glass wall behind him, thunder shaking the floor under them both. For one moment it felt as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting to see which of them would break first. And then he whispered the words that would change everything. "Let me prove to you that you are the first real thing I have ever had." The storm raged on, but in the silence between them a promise was born, a dangerous, fragile promise that would test the boundaries of trust and love and reveal whether this marriage was a lifeline or the beginning of a storm that neither of them could survive. The air in the penthouse heavy, as if the storm from the night before had seeped into the walls. Eliza woke to the sound of silence, the kind of silence that pressed against her chest and reminded her she was living inside a stranger's world. She found John already in the living room, His suit immaculate, his expression unreadable, but his gray eyes restless like a man pacing inside his own skin. He looked up when she entered, and for the briefest moment the mask slipped. He looked lost, vulnerable, almost afraid. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice rough. "Too many memories, too many thoughts." She hesitated, then crossed the room, her bare feet soft on the marble floor. "If we keep living like strangers," she whispered, "we will break before we even begin." The words hit him harder than she knew. He turned away, facing the endless view of the city. "My whole life, I have controlled everything, the companies, the numbers, the empire. But last night, when you touched me, I felt everything spin out of control. I wanted to run, and I wanted to stay all at once." Eliza stepped closer, her heart racing. "You are not the only one afraid," she confessed. "I have never been with anyone. I am as untouched as you are, but maybe that is what makes this real. We can begin from the same place." The confession stunned him. His shoulders stiffened, his hand gripped the edge of the glass table until his knuckles turned white. Then slowly he turned back to her, his eyes wide, his voice breaking. "You mean you have never?" She nodded, cheeks burning. "I thought I would wait for someone who saw me. For me, not for what I could give, not for what they could take." For a long moment silence wrapped around them again, but this silence was different, charged heavy with unspoken truths. John lifted his hand, trembling, and reached for her cheek. His fingers brushed her skin so lightly it felt more like a question than a touch. Her breath caught, but she did not. Pull away instead. She leaned into his palm, whispering, "It's just us. No one else, no expectations." He closed his eyes, the world narrowing to the warmth of her skin beneath his hand. For the first time in his life, he did not flinch. He did not retreat. He let the contact stay. His heart pounded against his ribs faster than any boardroom battle, any public speech. She opened her eyes, studying him, every line of his face, every crack in his armor. Then she whispered, "Do you trust me?" His throat worked as he swallowed the truth. "Yes, more than anyone, more than I should." Their closeness was shattered by the shrill ring of the phone. John's secretary's voice spilled through the speaker, urgent. "The press is demanding a statement. Rumors are spreading that the marriage is a cover that you have never touched. A woman. Cameras are outside the building. The headlines are cruel." John's jaw clenched, his hand dropped from her cheek, but his eyes never left hers. "They will tear us apart," he said, his voice low and full of fury, "unless we decide right now who we are." The suspense thickened in the space between them. Eliza felt her pulse racing, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She whispered, "Then let's decide together. Not for them, not for the world, for us." His eyes darkened with something raw, something untested but undeniable. And in that moment the distance that had stood like a fortress between them began to crumble. The storm outside was gone. But inside their walls another kind of storm was just beginning. One that would decide whether their first night together would shatter them or bind them forever. The city alive in whispers, headlines flashing across every screen. The story of the untouched millionaire and the 20-year-old virgin nurse spread like wildfire. Cameras gathered outside the penthouse, lenses pointed at their windows like weapons. Eliza stood behind the curtains, her hands trembling as she watched the crowd below her, heart hammered with fear, not for herself, but for her sister, whose name was already starting to appear in cruel speculation. John entered the room, his face set in stone, but his eyes betrayed the storm within him. He tossed his phone onto the table screen, glowing with another article. "They are calling this a performance," he said, his voice low. "They are calling you a liar, and me a fraud." He turned toward her, his jaw tight. "This is exactly why I never let anyone close. This is what happens when the world smells weakness." Eliza faced him, her own fear burning into anger. "You think this is weakness?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You think trust is weakness? You asked me to marry you. You promised me protection, not silence." She stepped closer, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What we have is fragile. Yes, but it is not weakness unless you let it be." His breath hitched the truth of her words, cutting through the armor he had built for years. For a moment he looked at her as if she were the only light in a room full of shadows. Then his control snapped. He slammed his hand against the wall, the sound echoing through the room. "I don't know how to do this," he shouted. "I don't know how to be a husband or a man who deserves you." The confession hung heavy between them. Eliza moved closer, undaunted, her voice soft but filled with power. "Then learn," she whispered. Learn with me, not for the cameras, not for the world, but for us. His body trembled as if her words had struck the very core of him. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. She reached out and took his hand, guiding it to a bare chest where her heart beat steady and strong. Do you feel that, she asked? That's trust. That's real. For the first time, he did not pull away. He let his palm rest against her warmth, his gray eyes lifting to hers, and in them she saw the boy abandoned, the man hardened by loss, and the fragile soul desperate to be seen. But just as the silence turned tender, a loud crash echoed through the penthouse, the sound of glass breaking. John spun around. Security burst in breathless. A photographer had scaled the terrace, desperate for the perfect shot. John's fury erupted like fire. "Get him out!" he roared, his voice filled with a violence Eliza had never heard before. The intruder was dragged away, but the damage was done. The world was clawing at their walls, tearing at their fragile beginning. John turned back to Eliza, his chest heaving, his face pale. "They will never stop," he said. "They will destroy you, destroy us unless we decide how much of ourselves we are willing to give." Eliza met his gaze, her voice steady even as her knees shook. "Then we fight back, not with lies, not with masks, but with truth. If the world wants to see us, then let them see who we really are." The suspense hung thick in the air. The choice was no longer about survival or scandal. It was about whether their first night together would be stolen by fear or claimed as a declaration of trust and love. For the first time, John let himself hope, and in that fragile spark lay the possibility of something powerful enough to silence the world. The city wrapped in darkness, the lights below their penthouse flickering like restless stars. John stood at the balcony, his suit jacket abandoned, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Eliza stepped quietly into the room, her heart pounding. She had never seen him look so human, so stripped of control. His gray eyes reflected the skyline, but behind them was fear and something more dangerous, longing. He turned when he sensed her, and for a moment the silence stretched like a wire between them. "I tried to prepare for tonight," he confessed, his voice low but unsteady. "I cooked dinner myself. I thought if I did something ordinary it would make this less terrifying, but nothing feels ordinary with you." Eliza approached, each step slow. Her bare feet soft against the floor, she could feel the tremor in the air between them. "I don't need grand gestures," she whispered. "I need you to let me in. I need you to stop hiding behind the walls you built when you were a boy." He shook his head, his voice sharp with desperation. "If I let you in, if I let myself feel, I may never be able to let you go." She reached him, then close enough to feel the heat of his body, the storm of his breath, and she lifted her hand to his face. He flinched at first, but this time he did not pull away. Instead, his jaw quivered, his chest rising and falling as though every breath was a battle. "Tell me about her," Eliza said softly. "Your mother." John closed his eyes, the memory sharp and painful. "She was the only one who ever held me after she died. I swore I would never need anyone again." His voice cracked. "I swore touch would never have power over me." Eliza pressed her lips to his scarred hand, gentle, reverent. "Then maybe it's time to break that vow," she whispered. "Maybe it is time to let touch heal instead of hurt." Something shattered inside him in that instant. Not glass, not stone, but the fortress he had carried for years. His hand moved, trembling until it cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin as if memorizing it for the first time. His breath came out ragged. "I am terrified," he admitted. She leaned closer, her voice steady. "Then let me be terrified with you." Their lips met, not rushed, not hesitant, but deep and trembling with years of restraint, breaking. The kiss was clumsy at first, a collision of fear and want. But it grew steady, stronger. His hands still shook as they framed her face, but he did not let go. She tasted the salt of his tears and the sweetness of surrender. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I have never kissed anyone before." Eliza held his gaze, her own eyes shining. "Then tonight we begin and the world can wait." Suspense crackled in the air, the cameras outside, the whispers of the press, the secrets of the past. None of it mattered. In that moment, the first true kiss had opened a door neither of them could close. and on the other side waited a night that would test every fear and every desire they had ever buried. The city drenched in midnight silence, the penthouse lights low, the only glow coming from the flicker of candles. John had lit himself. Their shadows danced across the glass walls as if the building itself held its breath. Eliza stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her heart racing, her pulse loud in her ears. She had kissed him once, but tonight felt different, heavier, as though every secret, every fear, and every hope pressed them closer to something neither could undo. John waited near the bed, his posture stiff but his eyes unguarded, gray pools filled with terror and hunger. "I do not know how to be this man," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I can command boardrooms, I can outthink rivals, but here with you, I am lost." Eliza stepped toward him, each step slow, deliberate, until she stood so close, his breath brushed her skin. "Then be lost with me," she whispered. "We will find the way together." He looked at her as though she were both salvation and fire, trembling. He lifted his hand to her arm, his fingers brushing bare skin for the first time in his life. The contact was so gentle it sent shivers racing through them both. His chest rose sharply as though he had touched lightning. She did not move away. Instead, she took his hand and placed it against her heart, steady and strong. "Feel that," she whispered. "You are not alone in this." His eyes darkened with wonder and fear. His lips parted, but no words came. He leaned forward as if gravity pulled him, and their mouths met again. This kiss, deeper, fiercer, a surrender and a plea rolled into one. He clutched her as if she might vanish, the walls he had carried all his life, crumbling brick by brick with each brush of her lips. The suspense thickened as the outside world raged, the press waiting to tear their story apart, the cameras hungry for proof. But inside these walls, time slowed. John's breath trembled against her neck, his voice breaking. "I have never felt anything like this. This. I am afraid of wanting too much." Eliza pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her voice calm and steady. "Then want all of me," she said, "because I want all of you." His hands shook as he touched her face, her shoulders then lower, each movement, hesitant as though asking permission. She guided him, whispering gentle truths. "You cannot break me. You cannot fail with me. Every touch is a beginning, not an end." The air between them burned with tension, with the weight of two untouched souls daring to collide. For the first time, he leaned into her, his forehead pressing against hers, his whisper raw with desperation. "If I give you everything, will you stay?" Eliza's answer came without hesitation. Always, suspense turned into surrender as they stepped together into the unknown. Their first night no longer about fear or contract, but about trust, about two hearts learning a language written only in touch, and for the first time in years, John Chambers felt alive, and Eliza Grant felt chosen. What neither of them saw was the shadow moving outside the penthouse, a camera lens waiting to capture the moment that would ignite the world. The city still asleep, dawn, only a faint whisper against the skyline. Eliza stirred in the bed, her heart beating to a rhythm she had never known before. The night had been tender, trembling, filled with pauses, laughter, and tears. They had crossed a threshold together, two untouched souls finding solace in each other's arms. John lay beside her, his chest rising and falling, his hand still clutching hers, even in sleep, as though afraid she might vanish. She studied him. The man the world saw as untouchable, yet who had wept in her arms as though her touch was the first warmth he had ever known. She felt both fierce and fragile, her heart burning with the certainty that what they shared could not be explained to anyone else. It was theirs, a secret born in candlelight, but the fragile peace cracked when the shrill ring of John's phone pierced the quiet. He woke instantly, his body tense, reaching for the device on the nightstand. His face hardened as he read the screen. "What is it?" Eliza asked, her voice still soft with sleep. His eyes met hers, and the storm was back. "The world knows," he whispered. "Someone was outside last night. Someone took photos." Her blood ran cold. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "What kind of photos?" John's jaw tightened, his voice like steel, enough to prove to them that we are not a lie enough to feed every rumor, every whisper, the marriage, the kiss, and now this. They will turn it into a circus. The knock at the penthouse door was sharp, relentless. John moved quickly, throwing on his shirt. Security voices echoed in the hall. "The press is downstairs. They won't leave without a statement." Eliza felt her throat close. Her family, her sister, they would all be dragged into this? John returned, his expression unreadable but his eyes blazing with fury. "I can protect you," he said, "but you must decide if we face them together or if I shield you alone." Her pulse raced, the choice clawing at her. She thought of Chloe, thought of her mother, thought of the fragile miracle they had created between them last night, and she realized running would only feed the lie. "We face them together," she whispered, her voice trembling, but sure. John's hand gripped hers tight, the strength of his touch no longer hesitant, no longer afraid, his voice low but steady. "Then we give them truth, nothing less." The suspense coiled around them as they stepped toward the storm outside, cameras waiting, questions ready to slice them apart. But in the hush of that moment, Eliza knew their first night had been more than intimacy. It had been a vow, and now the world would test it with fire. What neither of them knew was that among the photographers waiting below was a man with gray eyes like John's, carrying a secret that would shatter everything they thought they had survived. The lobby of the penthouse tower drowned in camera flashes, reporters shouting questions like arrows slicing through the air. John held Eliza's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white, but his grip was steady, unshaken. She felt her pulse thunder, but she did not look away from the storm outside. They stepped together into the fire. Questions rained down. Is this marriage real? Was last night staged? Did the virgin nurse sell herself to a billionaire? John pulled her close, his voice firm enough to silence the frenzy. "This woman is my wife," he declared, "and last night was not a scandal. It was the first night of truth in my life." The crowd roared, but his words pierced through Eliza's fear. For the first time she saw him not as the reclusive millionaire, but as a man who had chosen to fight for her. His arm around her was not just protection, it was possession and devotion. Rolled into one, still among the cameras, one figure remained still, a man with gray eyes, sharp and familiar. John froze when he saw him. The world fell away. His breath hitched, his past crashing into his present. "Father," John whispered, his voice breaking. Edward Chambers stepped forward, gaunt with illness but fierce in his stare. "I warned you wealth would destroy you. Now you risk everything for a woman you barely know." Gasps rippled through the crowd, headlines already forming. Eliza felt her knees weaken, but John steadied her, his voice low but filled with steel. "You left me to rot," he said. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. But this woman, this marriage, this is not destruction. It is the only thing that ever made me whole." Edward's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Pain, pride, fear. "I came because you are all I have left," he confessed. "I am dying, and I could not let go without seeing if you had learned to love again." The words shattered the frenzy around them. Silence, settling for a heartbeat. Eliza looked between father and so, and her voice soft but steady. "Then maybe this is not the end, but the beginning. Maybe forgiveness is the only way forward." John's chest heaved, torn between rage and longing, but he drew Eliza closer and lifted his chin. "If I forgive you, it will be because of her," he said. "Because she taught me that touch is not weakness, love is not a lie, and family is not something you walk away from." The cameras snapped, the crowd surged, but in that moment John and Eliza stood unshaken. They had crossed every line together, suspicion, scandal, intimacy. And now the ghosts of his past. Their first night together had not been just about desire. It had been about breaking chains. Edward lowered his gaze, tears slipping down his face. For the first time in decades, John saw his father as a man, not a monster. And though the wound could never fully heal, the chance for something fragile and new had been born. Later, when the chaos dimmed and the doors of the penthouse closed behind them, John turned to Eliza, his eyes wet but blazing. "You were my first kiss, my first touch, my first night, and now you are my first forever." Eliza pressed her forehead to his, her whisper steady. "Then, let this be our vow. No matter what storms come, we will stand together." The city pulsed outside the press, spun their stories. The world waited to tear them apart. But in the quiet of their home, their hearts beat in unison, no longer afraid, no longer untouched. Their love had survived its first trial, and in its survival lay the shocking truth that sometimes the greatest stories are not about fairy tale beginnings, but about two broken souls daring to heal together. Their story had begun with a vow of necessity, but it ended here with a vow of love and a promise that their first night together would never be the last.